This is you've upset people, Phil, on the internet because
Yeah.
because you are woke. 4020 magazine, it might as well just say woke. Social Justice Warriors Monthly on it. Woke Rugby League. Look at that. Black Lives Matter we did last time, and now you're saying that we should rename the Man of the Match award at the grand final, which for 99% of people who probably go to the grand final, including myself, don't even know who Harry Sunderland is anyway.
I'm not saying we should definitely rename it. I'm saying that we should discuss the possibility of renaming it in the light of there are a lot of institutions at the moment looking at things like statues that have been put up, names that have been given to places, in the light of the fact that history is an ever-changing feast. And what we know about Harry Sunderland and what we know about the person who I've suggested isn't recognised enough in the sport, who is Roy Francis, the father of modern coaching in both sides of the world, is a debate that we should have. I'm not suggesting in any way whatsoever that Harry Sunderland's name shouldn't stay on that trophy. And it may well be that the compromise is that Roy Francis gets a trophy named after him. What I'm saying is that there are allegations, some of which can be proven from, admittedly, a lot of sources going back to the 1930s that are hearsay of players and administrators at the time, that there is an allegation against Harry Sunderland, who was a journalist and administrator that came over from Australia, where they operated a very stringent whites-only policy at the time, that one of the reasons that Roy Francis was allowed to be let go from Wigan as a teenager, even though his record would indicate that he was worthy of a place in the team, was a racial undertone. But the story of Roy Francis is bigger than that. It's all about his contribution to the sport. I think that there were 3 instances in his life where his colour of skin stopped him getting the recognition he deserves. One was that he wasn't allowed to go on the 1946 Indomitables tour when he was clearly one of the form wingers in the competition, to the effect that the following year in 1947 he did get the cap that he deserved, and we laud the fact that he was the first black player to play for Great Britain. Well, he should have gone on that tour, but again, not wanting to upset Australians when the war had just finished and this was a tour to build bridges, they didn't want to take anybody of colour because of the whites-only policy that was being operated in Australia. Then he went to North Sydney in the late 60s when the game here was deemed to be ahead of that in Australia. People were looking at what Roy Francis had done as the most innovative coach in the world at the time in Rugby League, and North Sydney took him on, initially on a trial period in the summer in 1968. He helped them win 3 games when I think they'd only won 1 in the entire season, and they invited him back on a 3-year contract thereafter. And people like Frank Stanton, I think, looked at him and what he was bringing in and said, this is the guy who is the father of modern coaching. Now, if you look into the Roy Francis story, which is actually what I've written about in the magazine, it's all about how, because he was in the army as not just a fitness instructor, his job was to rehabilitate soldiers who'd been wounded. So he took a holistic approach, and it wasn't just about mending the bone that had broken, it was about mending the person. And he took that into coaching. So he was the first to involve wives and girlfriends as well as players. He was the first to video games and have analysis after them. He was the first to introduce sprint training. There were loads of things that he did that people now look back on and say that's the norm, but where did it start? And it started with Roy Francis. So my argument is, yes, he's black, but yes, he's also the most innovative coach that changed the face of the game. When the 1982 Kangaroos came here, it was the biggest kick up the arse that this country had ever had, because the Australians were playing a game that we didn't recognise, that was still called Rugby League. They had levels of fitness and preparation, even as part-time players, that we were so far off at the time. Roy Francis was the same, and he instituted a lot of what came back and bit us in those days, and we don't recognise him anywhere. He took Hull as a coach to Wembley twice. He won the championship twice with them. He rebuilt completely the Leeds team and the philosophy of the Leeds team that won everything in the late 1960s. He was, you speak to any player who played under him, be it Johnny Whiteley at Hull or John Atkinson at Leeds, and the one word they immediately use about Roy Francis was that he was revolutionary. but we don't recognise him. They don't recognise him in Wales. We don't recognise him here. We need to do something to redress that. Now, one of the ways we could do that would be to change the name of the trophy that's after somebody who perhaps didn't give him the opportunity to shine, but it's more a debate about if we're serious about racism. And John's written a brilliant piece about racism that you
about
can
to mention that, yeah.
I think it's published today in its longest form. We don't do enough. We pay token to being an all-inclusive sport, and we're not. And one of the things we could do, amongst a lot of other things we need to examine, is the role of somebody like Roy Francis. And that was why I wrote it, and that's why I wanted a debate to be had.
Just to make a point on that, and I agree with you, Phil, I think it should be renamed. I didn't know until I saw the Codebreakers documentary on BBC. I knew nothing about Roy Francis. I don't think, his story or his status is well known enough, not only in the UK, but in the Southern Hemisphere as well. I knew nothing about him. And he's essentially, as you've pointed out, he's kind of the Jack Gibson of the English game, and he should, have that exalted status, and he should have a lot of things named after him, but he doesn't. He was a trailblazer as a player and as a coach. Just obviously a revolutionary. So we should really be, celebrating him and his achievements.
We don't do well for naming things over here for some reason. I don't know.
Journalists shouldn't get anything named after.
Exactly, and that is the thing. We've, with the greatest respect to the contribution that the players made, both of our major individual awards on the field are named after administrators, and both of them are foreigners. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that there is a case for saying that there are people within our, Clive Sullivan, should have been knighted in virtually every other sport, even, posthumously. There should be some recognition of the fact that we won the World Cup in 1972, and he was the first black captain of any British team to win a World Cup.
Yeah,
we know that, and naming a road after him in Hull is fine, but it's not enough.
Yeah, it gets mentioned on radio too every so often, doesn't it? When there's roadworks or something, that's great recognition. As Scoy will always say, and people will disagree with him about 1,000,001 things, but he always says we don't do enough about the history of the sport, and he's exactly right. And hopefully the new museum, when it's built at the George, will rectify that somewhat. We will see.